Hello, hello, creatives. Today we have Michelle Norris on the podcast. Hey, Michelle. Thanks for being here.
Hi, Phoebe. Thanks for having me on.
So, can you tell everyone who's listening a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yes, I am a multimedia artist. I own the company Tropico Photo with my partner Forrest, where we do advertising photography. I also create content for social media on my personal Instagram that is really around mainly sustainable fashion, creating art, photography, travel, that sort of thing. And then now Forrest and I actually do interior design together, and I own a vintage store in Atlanta called Space Queen that is also like a hub for events and art.
I love it. You do so many things, which I think a lot of us can relate to, myself included. So, let's break it down. Well, okay, first of all, I guess what came first out of all of those things? What was your first project?
Yeah, so our first project was Tropico Photo. So Forrest and I both went to college for photography at the University of Georgia. And when we got out of college, we were sort of unclear about what to do with our photography art degree. The program there is very art focused, which is cool in a lot of ways, but also they were light on the business side, which I think a lot of us noticed after we'd completed the program. And Forrest knew some people in Atlanta that were doing ad photography. So he came here, and this is where he's from. So he came here and took a job doing like photography assisting and got more into the ad world. And I had been assisting a photographer in Athens, Georgia, doing all sorts of things. She's a food photographer, but she was kind of like me, where she had so many different projects that she was working on. So, like, on a day going to work with her, we could be like arranging flowers, we could be doing prop styling, photography, we could be going on some kind of adventure. So, it was great. But after I kind of wrapped up working for her, I decided to come to Atlanta and see what I could do here. And I met a woman who at a party who was like, "You've got great style. Have you ever done styling work?" And so I started working with, it's called the Spin Style. They are a fashion and prop styling like agency in Atlanta. And so that's what my pathway into ad photography was. And I was doing that assisting. And we both kind of worked doing assistant jobs on set for a couple of years. And then, we had used that time to kind of talk about how we could take our art photography that we're both very interested in similar things and kind of combine them and make a company where we could make money doing this and kind of work on where art and advertising intersect and like see if we could take our vibrant kind of playful style and make it something that translated to that industry. So then we started doing that together, working on a lot of portfolio projects, and then finally launched Tropico like 8 years ago. I'm like, I don't know, a while ago. So we've been doing that ever since. And then the other things came after that.
So, I mean, I think your photography and your work, like, is so colorful, and it really does have that intersection of art and, commodification of the product. Can
Yeah.
you talk a little bit about how you guys sort of developed that style and, like, also, like, were your styles different initially? Like, how did you sort of develop that style together?
I think that in college, I struggled a lot when we were doing like the first class you go into is like black and white photography. And I was sort of like, maybe I'm just not really cut out for photography like I thought. And then once we got into the color class, I was like, oh, this is so much better. So I always felt like my interest lied in color and kind of maybe that's my inspiration for like most art that I'm interested in. And then I felt like Forrest also has such a great eye for color, but his interests maybe build more from like he's always been more strongly interested in the technical side and what he can do for that with that. And I think that for myself, I've always been a little bit more interested in the aesthetic side. And so we shared a lot of similar interest. We would show each other work that we really liked. So I think we were kind of developing our styles at the same time. Like we had those initial leanings, but then we were taking in the same inspiration imagery, following the same artist. Early on, we discovered Juco Photo, who was an amazing photography team that was doing really colorful ad photography. And so I feel like we were building our art voices and also seeing people that were doing more of that artistic photography side at the same time. But then maybe it was when we kind of started testing out things together, but my interests were around like bringing together colorful and playful sets. My final project in college was one where I was using all these different multicolor LEDs to light people, so you got kind of like a prismatic, like rainbow sort of vibe. And Forrest was doing these very beautiful portraits that had like super rich color because of the film that he was using. So I think that color sort of was the unifier of all the different pieces. And then the style of ad photography that is really popular right now really started to have this resurgence around the time that we were graduating college. So I think it was a perfect storm of the things meeting, like what we had been inspired by and then what was actually kind of taking off in the advertising world.
And so what did those early days look like together as you started to develop your business and find clients?
Um, we were super poor. I feel like we were making it by with assisting, but there definitely was this balance of trying to assist enough to make our overheads work, but then also be leaving a lot of time and energy for making personal work. Because my biggest recommendation probably about like getting into freelance and getting into a creative industry that you're not yet in would be that it's so important to make work for yourself that you're excited about and that represents what you think you can do. And I think that that feels a little bit maybe like a luxury, but I think it's a balanced situation of having something flexible enough to hold you over while you explore and build this portfolio. Because even now, the portfolio work that we make in our free time that we do for fun is the work that I think gets clients the most excited and even gives them ideas about campaigns that they would like to involve us in. And so that was really essential early on. Like, what is our voice? How are we showing that? And building out your portfolio, making personal work that you're excited about is the most important part when you're getting going and to continue to do. So there was very much this balancing act happening of like wanting to say yes to sort of our day jobs and keep that work going, but using any days off building out like mood boards and drawing sets and creating our own work, which was super scrappy. So we were doing a lot of our sets out of like construction paper. And I was really into the idea of making like miniature paper art. And we were playing a lot with taking people and sort of doing guerrilla style shooting on colorful buildings around Atlanta, looking for achievable like destinations. And then we'd also kind of started picking up an interest in travel, which is ironic with all of the having no money portion. But I do think that we figured out how to be really scrappy about booking really super cheap flights and things so that we could go places and then work together on personal work there where we felt really inspired by the locations, by the newness, and really just like taking walks and looking at the quality of light, using me as a model, using Forrest as a model. And that was where we got our start with creating, kind of building our voice and creating our signature style that does rely a lot on this kind of heavy, bright, like sunlight feel that we saw a lot on our travels and then would recreate in studio here. So I think it was like using all of our extra time to be as creative as we possibly could. And then hoping that, through that, we would be able to finally launch our brand, get going on Instagram, and get a website up.
Was there a client that came into fruition that you were really excited about as you started to build your
Oh,
business?
that's such an interesting question. I'm like, we worked with so many great local Atlanta brands initially. So it was getting with people who were in this place where they were building their companies and they were big enough now where they had like budget for advertising, but it was still that local connection that really got us in with them. I guess the big like first breakthrough job that we had was for Postmates. That was like the first nationally like known kind of larger scale production, which was such a crazy learning experience because at that point we did everything on our sets. Like be we would be the photographers, the stylist, we were the producer, we were the PA, we were like every potential job was something that we were handling. And then when we got a job of that scale, it really was not possible. And it was our first time sort of learning to hire out people for different parts of the production, rely on their skills, and like bring together a team to execute a larger idea.
And so, okay, pivoting a little bit, when did you sort of start your own Instagram account? How did you sort of start to turn the camera around on yourself?
So I had always It's funny, we tell this story all the time because it's so silly, but I took forever to get a smartphone. Like was in college and like was using like a BlackBerry. So everyone else had Instagram except for me, and I would look at Instagram on my computer and I would dream of the day that I would have an Instagram. And then finally my phone broke and I found out like it was the same price to get like an iPhone or something like that. So in college when I got an iPhone, I was like so excited to have Instagram. And so I was really an avid user immediately once I had a way to be on the platform. So that predated like Tropico existing. I was always like, it was much more casual. You know, I was sharing photos of things here and there, but it was very aesthetically driven. And, you know, I think it's hard for me to look at things not that way. So it was just sharing inspirations about like my day to day and of friends and that sort of thing. So I was already in the habit of creating things for that and definitely doing so more as Forrest and I were like developing this visual language. But as we were first doing that, we were always just sharing on our personal accounts. We didn't have Tropico's account. And during that time, I was like being a lot more thoughtful about what I was sharing. But it really took a turn. I mean, we were using me as a model a lot in the beginning because I was available. I was always with us. I was down to do it. And then when 2020 happened, that was when it definitely like pushed over. Like I'd always been into fashion, that had always been integrated into our imagery. Obviously, I was doing styling work. And so all of this, like all the pieces were there. But in 2020, when we stopped being able to leave our houses, I felt like a lot more impetus to kind of be sharing things from home, be putting together outfits. Like everyone was a lot more, I think, on the internet in general. So I was observing what other people were making. And I think it then kind of started to really take off and definitely be a little bit more on the influencer side than just posting things I was seeing. And then I started, you know, getting inquiries about doing campaigns for different brands, doing trades, making work for them. And it's like, because I have this photography background, because I also am in some of the images, because I also have this styling background, I think it all became a perfect storm of that I could do all sorts of different projects for people. There's almost nothing that people had ever reached out for where I was like, that's not within my skill set, which is really fun. But it took off in a way that I definitely didn't anticipate. And, you know, really became a larger part of my identity was tethered to my own personal Instagram account and me as subject rather than just the artist behind the camera.
And then was there a moment where you were sort of intentionally reaching out to brands to monetize, or was that sort of all coming in for you?
Yeah. It was honestly all sort of coming in for me. I think now I have an agency that's been representing me for 2 years called No Logo, and they're actually based in the UK, but they're amazing. I love them. And that was the biggest move. Like they pitch for me now. They mainly manage incoming projects that are like reach outs from the other side, but they also do pitch me for jobs and get me work. That was like the biggest way that that now happens for me. But the main reason for me to get an agency at all was that I had become, after a year of doing it myself, which was lucrative, I was losing my mind. Spent like truly would wake up in the dark and work all day doing a variety of different things, and then, be working at night while eating dinner. I was like spending so much time negotiating, emailing, working on contracts with people, and then trying to also be creative, trying to also create what I was passionate about. And getting an agency was something that really happened out of practicality, more so that I was overwhelmed rather than that I was hoping for more work. So, what they did for me really was get me a lot more per campaign, and we started taking on less campaigns. So that was sort of the answer there, to create balance. And I think that it also helped me to spend more time and energy on each campaign and like be more thoughtful about it, because I think one of the things I'm still really passionate about on social media is like seeing things that are actually inspiring, they're actually thoughtful. I don't mean actually as like a to negate, like, I think there's lots of fun things on social media that like don't have to be the most thoughtful thing in the world, but I do think that I contemplate for myself, like, where do your interests lie? Like, what do you find stimulating and exciting? Because that can be very different for you than it is for maybe like what you like to passively see from time to time. And so I felt really good about being able to kind of reclaim the platform in order to make things I was more passionate about and talk in interesting ways about the campaigns. I'm really inspired by people who are able to do advertising for companies that not only are great companies that you're like selective about, but also that you make something of quality and that is like bringing something to other people's lives. Of course, advertising is about monetization, but I think we're all riding that line of that, like, you live in a world that is about money. We need money to live, but also how can we keep art the focus of that? How can we make sure that it like makes someone's day better or inspires them in some way? And that really helped when I was able to like pull back and look at things from that lens rather than saying yes to a million things and kind of running around crazy and being unsure what I was after.
Yeah. So, I mean, are you pretty selective about what sort of brands that you work with? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, I try to be quite selective. If I feel like a brand isn't a good fit, I just say no. I mean, it's hard. It's another one of those things I think that I learned to do this a little bit better because of Tropico. We were like really, really true to our aesthetic. So we would get offers for jobs that if they didn't aesthetically align, it was less so maybe about being selective about the literal client for that and more so about what we would be creating for them. But for social media, because the literal client is so integral to like your speaking for them, I think that ad photography, there's this like separation that happens where you're like, we're focused on the art we're making. We're not going to deliver it to people as part of the ad. So we're really just prioritizing the visuals. I think for social media, I got even more selective because you are endorsing it personally, not just making the art. So it's like multi-layered. I think that I want it to be a good fit artistically, of course. I think that's the whole reason that I got into any of these things. So I think I hold that as paramount. But then when it comes to who I'm speaking for, I think I try to be thoughtful about it. I think that there's times when it's a little bit like, the project is cool. The company is maybe not like my personal fave, but this is about their like new, more sustainable line or something like that. Then I think that there's times when that alignment happens. I think the dream is to always be working for companies that you're really super thrilled about and making work you're really thrilled about. And I think that it's always a striving and kind of balancing act to make sure that comes across.
What is your relationship with social media? Like, do you have any sort of I don't know. I want to hear about if there's any way that you sort of look at your metrics in a healthy or non-healthy way, or or your time used for social media.
Yeah. Yes, I look at my time use for social media a lot. I So one thing I love about my agency that was sort of a selling point when I ended up signing with them was that they have a wellness counselor on staff that you're able to make appointments with and talk to
That's
whenever.
great.
Yeah, and he is amazing, and he does a lot of work helping with like productivity, helping with mental health, but also a big part of that is like helping creators manage their relationship to social media. So I found that there were times in which I felt like neurotically kind of like reopening the app, like rechecking how things were going, and that it was really like scrambling my ability to focus on task, and also just like my attention span felt like it was like getting worse. So I felt like I would talk about that a lot with him. And the biggest things, like, I put on a time cap on Instagram. I think I'm allowed to be on there for 30 minutes a day. And then the other thing is that I felt like my main problem was actually like how much I opened the app, not how long I was on there. Like I would open it and then kind of be in it for a minute and then close it and then like reopen it 10 minutes later. And I've heard this from other people. I definitely know that it can be a struggle. But Jack is his name, the wellness counselor. Like the thing that he really advised that helped me a lot was just putting physical distance between myself and my phone. So, I mean, he was like, they don't want me to be counseling everyone to do this, but we should honestly, you guys should all just like turn your phones off during the day. And I'm like, I don't think I can do that. But I do think trying to like not carry my phone around with me into different rooms, or like when I left the house and realized I forgot my phone, just like don't go back to get it. I think trying to be as outside of the world of social media as possible, which is funny because it's like the whole idea is that you're making things for it. But I think that what I strive for is to use it as a creative tool the way that I do with other things. So like I think about Pinterest as a great example. I get on Pinterest with a very clear goal when I go on there. I'm like looking for nail art inspiration. I'm like looking for interior design inspiration. I'm like sharing something. It doesn't absorb me in the same way. And I always leave like more enriched because I went with a reason, I found it, and then I disengaged. So now I try to use Instagram or TikTok the same way. If I'm going on, it's either to respond to people, to look at the messages, to respond to them, to interact with them, to spend 15 minutes scrolling on purpose to see what people I follow are up to, or to post. But there's like no in between. Like I'm trying to disconnect from the feeling of needing to monitor the results of a post as soon as it goes live, and instead be like, in an hour, you can check in. And if you want to hide likes, you can. And then that has to be it. So I'm trying to do that. I think also because there's this world where I've had to take stock of, is what you want to be famous, or is what you want to be paid to make art? And I think what I want is to be paid to make art. I see Instagram as a tool for that, but there's no need for me to get caught up in just the numbers of it, especially because I have no control over them. Like ultimately, actually your podcast is one where I feel like I learn good like actual tips on what I can do to improve it, but I think staring at it definitely isn't doing that. And it's hard. You have to like keep reminding yourself of that, but in the end I want the validation to come from being proud of the thing I created, not obsessing over the results of once I shared it. Because I've honestly made stuff that I thought was like not good that did really well. And then it's like you don't even get, like I wasn't excited in the end because I was like, I hate that this is the thing that did well. I shouldn't have even put it up here because I only want to be putting out things that I'm like really proud of and personally endorse.
So I guess on the other side of things, what do you think makes good content?
Oh, wow.
And we pivot.
Yeah, I know. I was like, um, what do I think makes good content? That's so interesting. I mean, I think that the thing that makes it the best, in my opinion, is when you can tell that it's coming from within. I think that things on TikTok that are like meant to play off of another idea, I think that that is an interesting prompt. But my favorite part is when I see someone really take their own spin on it. So, like, even if it's creating, like, using a trend to inform how you show something, I'm always inspired to see people showing their uniqueness through what they're making. So like it is truly inspiring when I see something and think, I've never thought of that before. I never thought about putting that together that way. I've never seen anyone do this. Like, just kind of bringing something original to it, and like, what is your voice? What is your personal touch? And that's really, I think, what I find the most interesting. I want to know like what makes, I mean, it's kind of like what makes people artists is like, what do you bring to the table that's like coming from inside of you?
I think what is helpful here, what I'm absorbing, is you keep on referencing art, which I
Yeah.
think is so important because I think a lot of our community is grappling with this like content versus art situation, and also like where we're getting value from. Like, are we getting value from our own creations and being proud of our work? Or are we getting value from these metrics? What does it mean when, this maybe sort of shittier piece of art or content is perceived by a lot of people? And what does it mean when something that we're really proud of, that we like making, isn't? And then, like,
Yeah.
how is it all tied in with money? And it's complicated. And I think some of these things that you're touching on with boundaries are really helpful. And this, like, I just posted today about, practicing non-attachment with the metrics. I think it's really key, and it's complicated. And I think that there's a lot of intention and discipline that goes into this practice.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that it's really tough not to get caught up in the metrics of it. And while you need to have some awareness of that, I think in the ways that it can help you improve things like the times of day that are working, or like little hacks about stories, like using a poll to like help with engagement, or like when I post like a text only like box, I tend to get more views. So it's like maybe post that before you post something you want a lot of people to see. That sort of thing, I think, can be useful. And then I think there's this whole other huge world that's not useful, which is like, why don't people like what I make more? Why this post and not that one? I'm like, those things are, I think, truly based in algorithmic things that have to do with like how long people look at things. What do you look like? What's the light like on, like, stuff that some is changeable, some isn't. But I do think if you're chasing that, you might lose sight of the bigger question, which is like, what made you want to do this instead of something else? Like, what about this are you actually passionate about? Of course, there's this need to make money and be attached to how profitable things are. But I feel like for myself, when I think about what has driven the success that I found so far, I do think it's really that I'm making the things that I love, I'm sharing the things that I love. And I think that if I just refocus on that piece, when I get really down or like frustrated with Instagram, I find that when I go out and just make something for myself, do a shoot that was an idea I had for fun, something like that, I tend to feel kind of re-inspired when I'm like, this is why I do it. I have to like this regardless of what the results are. And that's like that's a hard thing, but I think it's also sort of in that world of making the portfolio work in order to get off the ground, is just believing that if you are really putting yourself into it, if you believe it's something of quality and that deserves to be seen, then that will be echoed back to you in some form. And sometimes it takes longer. I think that there's so much like instant gratification that we're looking for now. Like, read as, I post this thing, I hope I'm famous tomorrow. I post a thing, I hope a million, it goes viral. Like, the concept of going viral is all about immediate gratification. What I found is that when you're making really quality things, of course, there are some brands that will hire you because they think the video will go viral. But there's this other part of the Venn diagram that I think you can't miss out on, which is that they need to feel like what you're making is quality and that you have a voice. So when people lose that voice through chasing too many trends, through saying yes to literally any sponsorship, that sort of thing, you're like losing sight of the whole other piece, which is that maybe you'll get a way bigger project down the line for a company you're more excited about, where you get to be more of a spokesperson because they saw that you had this voice as an artist, this integrity, this quality that you're committed to. And I think it's easier to build towards that kind of thing and know that those opportunities will come when you remain true to yourself, which sounds so like Disney, like remain true to yourself. But I am like that. I mean, that kind of is it. I mean, otherwise it's hard to know what you're making or why.
It's so true. I really agree. Let's hear about your latest project, your new in-person retail store.
Yeah. So Space Queen was opened in March, and it's in a gas station from the 1920s. And we
Okay.
started renovating it December of last year. So we renovated it for the 4 months, or I guess like five. And now, like, I've always wanted to do a vintage store. I love fashion. I became passionate about sustainable fashion quite a while ago. I'd say like pretty early as far as it goes for people, because I was like in high school at the point when I felt like this became important to me, partially because my parents did not want to spend any money on me getting like clothes from Limited Too or wherever. And so I like got into thrifting really early on, and I liked how unique the pieces were, and I like had a teacher early on that was really into like painting on clothes and stuff. So I felt inspired by those things, which is what really led me into um, vintage and thrift shopping. And then I felt really inspired by seeing people doing small brands on Instagram, like making things, upcycling handmade pieces. And that's a huge part of my own platform. But as it goes, I feel like getting more interested in these things. I was like, I wish we had more stuff in Atlanta like this, that was like cool vintage markets, that was like these really beautiful like boutique style like vintage stores that you see a lot more of in LA and New York. We don't really have so much of that in Atlanta. And also having a place where I could directly support makers. So when we saw this building up for rent, Forrest and I had actually been looking for an office, which I laugh about, like, leave it to us to like go out looking for an office and find a vintage store, art space, office hybrid situation. But it's a very cool building. And I think that the idea really crystallized in the discovery of the building, because it had felt a little bit like a kind of floating around concept. So if I would love to have a vintage store one day, we would love to have our own office. We would love to be able to like throw events. And this has a lot of outdoor space. It's got a front area that's so beautiful, and that's what Space Queen is. And then in the back, we actually do have a large office space. And then, we have vintage markets a couple of times a month where we'll have people pop up outside, and the shop carries vintage that I source, but then also a lot of local makers. And it was really fun to see some of the relationships that I built through Instagram, through collaborating with smaller makers, now turn into we're carrying their items in the shop, and are able to directly support them. So it's crazy that we did that, but here we are. And I love having the shop now. And it's like, it's a 10-minute bike ride from the condo. It's like a really positive and light space.
It's beautiful. And I think you've done a collab with Sophie of Take Shape Studio before, right?
Yes, yes, I
Yeah.
have.
So we're friends, and she was one of the first people that helped me throw one of our craft fairs, because she
Amazing.
actually threw a craft fair back in the day too, and then we merged. So, anyways,
Cool. I love that.
yeah, she's great. Okay, so do you have a studio there? Are you also taking photos in the space too?
We have done one photo shoot back there, but it's really built mainly for like it's like we had this really large table built that can seat 12 people, for the purpose of doing like artist workshops back there. And then I'll go work there during the week, but it's more set up for like office work. And then usually for photo shoots, most of the jobs have the budget for renting a studio. So we like deprioritized having a shooting space and moved to like wanting to have a space outside of the house to work in, because Forrest and I actually had our own large like studio space for 3 years, and it was great. But a lot of our projects outgrew it and left us to feel like we didn't need to carry that month to month, and rather that we would like to facilitate being like a little bit more efficient working outside of the home.
That makes sense. So you do a lot of things.
Yeah.
What does your day to day look like? How are you balancing all these projects?
um, you know, I think that it's a little bit crazy feeling. I think when Space Queen started, I felt pretty stressed out. I think once we had opened, I have two great employees that they're there all the days that it's open. So like I do sourcing, pricing, that sort of stuff. I'm really involved with coordinating events, with the relationships with vendors, that kind of thing. But they're there like manning the shop when it's open 4 days a week. But when it first started, it was like, I never even worked in retail. Uh, so like I was like, I don't know what we're doing. I really never had employees. Like we've had contractors, but no one who was my actual employee. So there was a lot to figure out. And I think that like the early phase, I was like, we have taken on more than maybe we should have. But thankfully, what ended up happening was that a lot of parts of it became more routine. You get better at everything. I think that I'm able to compartmentalize a lot more now, like getting all the Space Queen stuff done. And actually, the wellness counselor helped me a lot with getting me on this app called Todoist. And it's an app where you can just time block your day and your task and categorize them by different groupings. So like now I have my Instagram is a grouping, Tropico is a grouping, personal life is a grouping, Space Queen is a grouping, and then our interior design is its own grouping. And really, time blocking has saved my life because I think what was going on was actually that the tasks were not too many to complete, but I think that the headspace it was taking up of being like, which thing should I start on? What should I do right now? Like I it really helped me a lot to start using this because one thing that I saw was that once I was putting things into categories and like realistically putting how long they would take, I was realizing that I was scheduling around like 12 hours of work every day. And I don't want to do that. So now I've like moved closer to actually doing more like 6 hours of work a day, but like really focused work. So like I feel like I'm almost getting more done because there's not this feeling of overwhelm and that the world is falling down on me. And I think I have a lot better of a grasp of what needs to be achieved and by when. And being freelance as I have been, you know, I guess I've never had like a 9 to 5 or like a job with a boss, but being freelance, one thing that I have learned is that there's all these in between weeks. Like I'll have these weeks that are like the world is on fire, there's a lot of stuff literally due. And then there's a lot of these weeks that seem quiet, but really there's all this work that should be happening during those when you have a little bit more mental headspace, when you don't have 1,000 deadlines. And this has really helped me to make better use of those weeks. So to say, like, you have all these long term goals written out, and then it's helpful because sometimes I'll be doing something else and have an idea for something, and I'll just go ahead and jot it down in this app, and then I'll assign the time for it later or a deadline for it later. But it's so that I don't like have this like all this bandwidth I'm using to try to like remember what I want to be doing and what was that idea I had. And then when I have one of those weeks that's like less active, I look at the longer term goals and I go ahead and like make the subcategories of what all needs to happen in order for those to become a reality and go ahead and just block time for it. So it doesn't feel abstract anymore. It's like from 2 to 5 on Monday, I'm going to make those signs that I've been talking about putting out on the corner to like point to Space Queen, something that feels like it's not that hard. And when I start actually blocking time for it, I'm like, how long will this take? 3 hours, 2 hours to even then go get it printed? It's like seeing the times in front of me and like no, suddenly then it becomes real and I know I can achieve it. That has really been the key for me to like stay on task and like make all of these things work together. And it's also helped me to say no to things because I can look at the week. I can look at what the like current load is with the things that I've already committed to, and I can truthfully say I can't do that other thing, which I used to never be able to do because I was like, it's cool, I want to do it. And now I'm like, no, there's time and space, and this just isn't a reality for me.
Yeah, I love blocking. I do that manually, but I think that's interesting. I'll check out that app. That's
Yeah, it's
cool.
amazing. So yeah, I mean, every one of my days is different now, but I like start most every day either going on a run or going to yoga or Pilates, and then I generally now try to have like 3 tasks a day that like need to happen so that I can give each of them 2 to 3 hours because I find that I focus better when I can commit to like just spending longer on one thing instead of hopping around, which I think I used to do a little bit too much. And then I try if I can to make the time block out the next day unless I've done like several days in a row. But like, of course things come up and you have to change plans. But the other thing it's helped me do is recognize like there are days that will get derailed by like things that come up. But now I know where my time went. I'm not like, did that hour get lost on Instagram? I'm like, no, no, no. I have it all like blocked out here. And then if something came up that literally had to be addressed, then that's not like a waste of time. I don't need to be frustrated. That had to be handled. And then I move the task to the next day.
What's your sign?
I'm a Taurus.
Okay.
Yeah.
Love Virgo. So,
Oh, okay, cool.
yeah. Okay. Like, are there is any sort of last advice that you want to bestow upon creatives? I think you've offered a lot of beautiful advice around boundaries and starting out and
Yeah.
taking care of yourself, but anything else that you feel like you left out that you want to share?
I mean, I think that the biggest thing that I would say is like for longevity in freelance and for longevity in being your own boss, for creating things yourself, I think more than anything, the important thing is to find out what makes you feel like sparkly and excited and what you care about sharing, creating, doing, and then really focus on that. Because I think in the changing world of social media, of algorithms, content creators, all of these things, it's really easy to get caught up in chasing what you think is going to have the most immediate results, but I don't know that they are the most like long term. I think you need to know at the end of the day like what your voice is, and in 20 years do you feel like you will have been happy that you spent the time on this work, or will it feel like a passing post?
Yeah. Thank you for that. Where can our listeners find you?
You can find me on Instagram at Michelle Norris Photo, or you can find Tropico Photo on Instagram at Tropico Photo, Tropico Photo. Or you can follow Space Queen at Space Queen _ ATL. And yeah, that's pretty much where everything lives.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle. This has been an absolute treat, and it was so fun to talk to you.
It was great talking to you too. Thanks for having me on.